Hey everybody, and Tony here with a review of Wagner's Tristan und Isolde, live from the Metropolitan Opera House, which I saw last night at the Kino in der Kulturbrauerei. The conductor was Sir Simon Rattle, the production was done by Mario Starlinski, the set designs were done by Boris Kudlicka, the costumes were done by Marek Adamski, the lights were handled by Mark Heinz, the projections were done by Bartek Matsias, the choreographer was Thomas Vigoda, and the filmographer was Gary Halverson. This also marks the Metropolitan Opera Live in HD's first transmission out of the many 10 other transmissions for the season of 2016 to 2017, and this also marks the 50th anniversary of the Metropolitan Opera House in Lincoln Center. Going into the production, it was really dark all around, and this is also set on a ship with each of the preceding acts beginning with a navigator to basically state which direction all the characters are going through in their stories and where they're going to in terms of their final destinations. The first act begins in Isolde's and Brangena's cabin, where they're being watched via surveillance cameras through Tristan's cabin, and connecting them are stairs which lead from their cabin all the way up to Captain Tristan's cabin, which is quite interesting to know because it also shows a little bit more of the intimacy of how Tristan and Isolde get to know each other, what with Tristan observing Isolde through a surveillance camera, thus catching her every move and her every word before he's able to talk to her face to face. And I find it really interesting because it is basically showing the budding relationship that these two have, even though it does start off as kind of creepy, but pretty interesting, and not just Tristan coming in after Isolde rants and raves about him. What's also interesting is the potion collection that Brangena has, in which we see the first potion, which is green, and it's a potion that basically heals all ails. And then when you get to the love and death potion, it's clearly almost like water, almost like a soluble. And when Brangena gives Tristan and Isolde the potion, it's basically diluted in water, which makes it even more subtle, as the effects might end up coming into play once they drink it, and they probably may not expect anything if it were just pure clear water. But once the potion comes into effect, then the effects really become a lot more exciting and a lot more subtle in terms of how they confess their love to each other. The second act begins on the cockpit, in which we first see Isolde in a black trench coat, especially with Brangena also in a black trench coat, and she's awaiting for Tristan. And during their love duet, we see a neon green Aurelia Borealis, which looks absolutely lovely. Through this love duet, we get treated to some really abstract images, which are basically optical illusions coming into play, which I find rather interesting, but almost kind of unusual in terms of this opera. And from the cockpit, we're then led into the basement, where there are a lot of chemicals there, and it basically traverses from going from the upstairs area all the way to the downstairs area where all the chemicals and all of the artilleries are being found. The third act culminates in the infirmary, where after Tristan was injured through Melot's gunshot, is being taken care of by Corvinal and, of course, the shepherd. Finally, the opera ends with Isolde basically not only singing her Liebestod, but also seeing Tristan's ghost and she herself has finally transcended the flesh and manages to join Tristan in a deathly silence of a reunion. So I really found this production quite dark, but I kind of find it fascinating, mostly because when you see all the characters on a ship, you could definitely tell that it is a never-ending odyssey for all of them, especially for the main lovers in terms of how they get to terms with their feelings for each other and their love for each other, and of course, the eventual destruction that both of them will have to face. The costumes were quite interesting in their own special ways. A lot of black and gray has been used, and they're basically the dominant colors for all of the characters, with the exception of King Maka, who comes in a white admiral suit with badges of honor on his right side. And what's also interesting is that Marca in this production has a scar right across his face to signalize that he is a battle-hardened man who's fought many a battle but still maintains his integrity and his honor for his country. And I really love the costumes of Tristan and Melot to show that they're not only of noble blood, but also captains of their own ship and are basically willing to fight for anything from beginning to end. Isolde initially starts off with wearing pants and a cardigan, and it may look simple on her, but as soon as we go to the second act, she's initially in a black trench coat, but once she gets rid of that trench coat, she's then seen in a crimson gown, but when she's taken away by King Maka's men, she is then wearing a black gown. But in the final act, she is then seen wearing her crimson gown again, stating that she is finally reunited with Tristan. So I may have mixed feelings about this production, but in terms of the visuals, it is just quite entrancing in its own special way. Another element that I found quite fascinating about this production is that we also get to see a young Tristan and also his father, and also the fact that we get to see Morold's execution via gunshot through Tristan. And it's not just telling about it, but actually showing it in detail as Morold is held captive and Tristan just shoots his head off right there and right on the spot, which makes the effect even more interesting as we get to see it happen in action. So there were some great things happening in this production here and there. Even though I'm not really a huge fan of the overall production, I still have to give it credit for making sure that all of the visuals come into play, and of course, some of the costumes looking absolutely elegant on all the singers. And speaking of the singers, we have Stuart Skelton singing our Tristan, and he is a gentleman who is tall, ruggedly handsome, and just so alluring in his own special way. He really looked like a hero. He was powerfully built, and his stage presence was noble and charming in his own special way. And he really knew how to muscle in throughout the entire evening. He sang Tristan with such a steely and robust technique, which is no surprise as Mr. Skelton has been specializing in a lot of the Heldentenor repertoire, from Siegmund to Tannhäuser to Otello, and of course Tristan, in which he's been singing the world over. Yes, there were moments where he kind of had to help himself up, and there were moments in which he sort of struggled in the third act, but I still have to give him a huge salute for the strength that he had to summon and for just being a very robust and very determined performer in this role. He really knew how to muscle in throughout the entire evening, and he really knew how to show a lot of stamina in terms of this difficult role, and he managed to act and sing this role really well. Nina's Stimme as Isolde was also solidly sung. Yes, I would have preferred a steelier voice, like let's say Astrid Varnay, or even a more mezzo-sounding voice like Helena Braun or Waltraud Maya, but I still have to give loads of credit to Madame Stimme for everything she had to pull off in terms of Isolde. She's been singing this role for about 10 years now, and she really knows how to portray this rebelliousness that this princess has, but at the same time, she knew how to really navigate throughout the entire opera in terms of her acting. She was able to bring out a lot of excitement through this iconic Wagner heroine, and she managed to pull off her Isolde wonderfully, really ending the entire Liebestod with such a softly sung note, and she did wonderfully. Yes, there are moments where she struggled here and there, but I still have to give her loads of credit in terms of everything she had to pull off in terms of this iconic Wagner heroine. Brangena was sung by the excellent young dramatic mezzo Ekaterina Gubanova, who I also saw in the same role about 2 years ago at the Teatro Colón in Argentina. She was absolutely fabulous as Brangena, as expected from her. She's fabulous in a lot of the roles for a high dramatic mezzo, and it really shows. She was consistently excellent throughout the entire evening. She started out strong and she ended out on a bang. She really knew how to navigate through this character. She knew how to really play with her other colleagues wonderfully, and she was able to sing very, very gorgeously. Her voice is both steely yet absolutely gorgeous. Her stage presence was really involving, and she looked absolutely wonderful with that hairstyle. She was absolutely elegant, but at the same time powerful in her own special way. She really brought Brangena to life, and it really showed in her excellent portrayal of this wonderful mezzo character. Kurvanal was sung by the superb Russian bass baritone Evgeny Nikitin, who's been very well known for singing the roles for dramatic baritone and for a bass baritone. Roles like Johanna Ann, Telramund, The Herald, Wotan, Donna, Fazot, and many other superb roles for both a dramatic baritone and a bass baritone, and even to some extent a basso cantante. He sang Corvinal wonderfully, giving off such a gruff and rugged stage presence, but at the same time really having this focused, dramatic baritone instrument which he manipulated wonderfully. What more can I say about René Pape as King Marke? He's been singing this role since 1999, and he is an absolute pro in this iconic king role. Yes, it may be thankless, but he still managed to pull it off wonderfully. What more can you even expect from a gentleman who plays a lot of kings, fathers, grandfathers, noblemen in general, and even to some extent, villains like Mephistopheles? He's an absolute pro in embodying these roles, and he is a king in every single way in which he should be. There's no surprise that René Pape really pulled off this role flawlessly, and he managed to sing with a lot of passion, pathos, and really knew how to pull off this iconic Wagner King role. and he just did wonderfully. He sang with plushness, authority, and he had a very fine and rich timbre. Neil Cooper's Melot may sound grainy, but he still has a very fine stage presence. Tony Stevenson, as the sailor, was the absolute standout out of all the smaller roles, and he sang with his plush, full lyric tenor voice with authority and grace. David Crawford, as the steersman, had a very plush sounding voice and really knew how to make the best out of this very thankless small part. Then we go to Alex Richardson, who has a very fine character tenor voice, and he uses it very well. So overall, the singing was absolutely solid. My hat really has to go off to Ekaterina Gubanova as Brangena for being the absolute star of the evening in terms of the women's roles, and in terms of the men's roles, I really have to give my hat off to René Pape as King Marco. Simon Rattle's conducting was very solid all throughout, which is no surprise as he has been conducting a lot of the dramatic operas for quite some time, and he really knew how to pay attention to all the nuances and all of those beats in such a manner that is full of tact and a lot of strategy being used. So overall, this was definitely a great opening to the new season of the Metropolitan Opera Live in HD Productions. Speaking of which, we also had an intermission feature featuring two of the singers of the old and new Met, Rosalind Elias and Justino Diaz, and they were talking about their experiences in terms of how they compared the old Met to the new Met in Lincoln Center, and their various experiences singing Samuel Barber's Antony and Cleopatra. This is definitely a very fine addition to what was an absolute great opener to the new season of the Met Opera Live in HD Productions. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to tune in later for my review of Beethoven's Fidelio at the Staatsoper im Stadttheater. So until then, have a great day, everybody.